didn't know how much time you guys would have left. So if you want to lean into that, that's fine, but we do need to. Correct. Yep. So you'll be in here for Public Works. So we are recording when you're ready.
So I'll be order at 30 p.m. We're going to start with item 1, consider committee member policy 33.
I have no real discussion. I guess my question is, have reached out.
Assistant Village Manager Chris Anderson reached out earlier in the process by phone, and then they were also communicated to by email and provided a date of which to respond back to us with. We always take efforts to reach out to those committee members, and for one reason or another, they've been unresponsive.
You know, just being a part of important that forums to
I agree completely, and I think it's not a personal knock on these individuals. We all have lives outside of these volunteer commitments. It is just that, it's a volunteer job. If you can't make it, you can't make it. That's no problem whatsoever. But we do have other people who want to serve and can serve, and so just to keep the process rolling, I think it's okay to move forward with the removal request at this time. So.
what does that mean?
One of the reasons why I wanted you to continue to hear this item this evening is because this will go to the board at the November 7th meeting. And so I believe it's the intention of that group to try to generate some applicants so that they can get their committee up to full staff.
Sure. Okay. Then happy to make a motion here. Move to advance the removal request to the full village board on the 7th. All in favor? Is both of us. So that's it. That's that.
Not changed my mind.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if there's anybody here in the public. It looks like we have some.
Yeah, happy to hear it now or on the 7th if there's any concern.
I don't see anyone with their hand raised.
Did we want to discuss item 2, but maybe not vote on it without Melissa? If
It's
we
up
think
to-
about that?
Up to the two of you.
Okay.
Mhm.
So at least talk it through. Sure.
We've got residents. But before we do that, I can't.
Is that better? Can you?
Now it's very, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe let's start with I thought you wrote a really here.
Sure, absolutely. Oh, my mic is very low. Sorry, let me. So in general, I have a little problem with this proposal, specifically because let's see. Sorry, bear with. So, what I don't like is this idea of, using the legislative branch to approve executive branch. I know that we're all familiar with that from the Constitution. The Senate approves, Supreme Court, things like that. But unfortunately, it's a policy that, although well intended, doesn't actually work as intended. What it ends up doing is shifting the power of the appointments to the legislature. So the executive branch still has the job of making an appointment, but they have absolutely no power over seating any appointment. The legislature has full control over that. It's been very obvious in recent Supreme Court seating, specifically President Obama appointing Merrick Garland, and the Senate refused to even hold a hearing or hold meetings with Merrick Garland. And so then a Supreme Court seat was left vacant for over a year. So that's one example of a problem, but it also, the state Supreme Court in Wisconsin recently set this as legal precedent that the legislature is the one that holds the power, regardless of an individual serving a term, regardless of an executive branch appointment. The legislature ultimately is in power. And that was with the case on the DNR board, where the individual refused to step down after their term was up. Governor Evers gave an appointment, and it was never taken up by the state Senate. And the state Supreme Court weighed in and said that this person is allowed to stay as long as they want until the legislature seats somebody. So given that, here in our village structure, the village president has the job of appointing people to these seats. And we, as the legislature, should not then take the power away from that office, since we don't really have that job in the first place. And I think the check on power is at the ballot box. You're voting for an executive with that job should stay in that lane. When you're voting for a legislator, like a normal trustee, we don't have that power. We shouldn't be voted in office based on our decision-making. I think it protects, keeping the duties separate protects against a rogue legislature. And I think it's really the only way to properly do it. So.
No, I think that's a really well thought out, Trustee Lynn. I tend to agree with, the majority of what you're saying. It's really complicated. I've been a trustee where, I've kind of been on almost both ends of this, where I had, one president threatened to not put me on a board, because of politics. And I think, we run into these issues with being such a small community and being, it becoming politically divisive at times. It can be a challenge. So, but on the flip side, I do feel like we vote for a president for a certain reason, and I think those are the duties of the president as they're outlined. Could you give us a little history as to why this is coming up, or where what's been the powers of the president in the past, and has that changed? Could you just give us a little more detail on that?
Well, the state statute on this is included within the scope of your memo. There is at one point when we aligned to make sure that was clear in our code. And there was a future agenda item of consideration to further explore a charter ordinance with regards to this matter, which is why you see Attorney Bayer weighing in and recommending that, as opposed to, should the board desire to pursue this, he would simply advise the group a more efficient manner to proceed would be to just reverse the order. We do have one individual with their hand raised. I want to be cognizant of time because it's 6:39. Does the group care to hear?
If, I hate to say it, if we keep it short, but we do have to an agenda to kind of get to at the Department of Public Works, but would still love to, if we can keep a concise comment, I would love to hear from the resident.
Okay. Jenny Volpus?
Yeah, do I give my address and all that, Rebecca?
Yes, please.
Okay, Jennifer Cooney Volpus, 4331 North Alpine Avenue, Shorewood, Wisconsin.
And you're welcome to turn on your video, Jenny, if you'd like.
Oh. Okay, this scares me. I mean, the examples that you guys have given is the legislative branch where people have taken power and they're exercising that. But I think you're doing the opposite, and you're giving all the power to the president. Now, as a board, you guys are representing residents, and I think you're taking away any sort of representation that we residents might be able to, if we have comments, we can talk to various board members and get our point of view across. But if it's only going through one person, the president, it just seems like you're giving way too much power to the one president. Now, this is different. The Plan Commission is a very important committee for the village. And it's not like some smaller committee. This is a really huge decision. And I really would like you guys to rethink this idea. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm all for democracy, and this just seems like it's turning into more of an autocracy of our little village. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Can I ask one question? Did President Rozak have this same power?
That's clarified in the memo as well. She did exercise this power.
Okay. So past presidents have done, this isn't new. Past presidents have appointed people to these commissions.
My understanding is that the issue was raised under President Rose's term.
Okay. Thank you.
We are at 6:42.
We're not going to vote on this today, but do we have a motion to it, or where do you stand? Do you think you're ready to vote on this, or do we want to wait for Melissa? I'm happy to go either way. I know we're just.
I'm ready to vote on
Right,
it, but
sorry.
I think we should just out of respect probably wait for Melissa.
Sure.
But I don't think my vote's going to change. So I think we can hang out and wait for Melissa unless you'd like to take this now and.
Agreed. I think the state and federal precedent is very clear on this, that it's a shift of power to the legislature, and it creates a lopsided power. So I think my vote on this would be the same, but I think it'd be fair to include Melissa on this in 2 weeks. So we'll defer for the time. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Meeting adjourned at 6:43 PM.
All right. Good evening, everyone. It's 6:43. I'd like to call the Committee of Department of Public Works Committee to order. Can I get a roll call?
Is he Trustee Lib,
Present.
Trustee Ursink,
Present. And Trustee Baldoff is excused.
Director, do I do Director?
No.
Bushlick?
All right, so we've got a full agenda tonight. Starting off the first agenda item, we have consider refinement of policy 43, traffic and parking regulation request program. Here to present that is Bart Griepenschlag.
Thank you, Trustee Ursink. So what is before us tonight is a refinement of a relatively recent policy that was adopted in summer of 2021 in response to the village's transportation and parking analysis of 2020. This program is intended to clarify how staff administers requests from the public with respect to both traffic and parking regulation requests. Over the past year, we've taken in various requests and understand that there's a need to clarify various portions of the program, including what does or does not qualify for something that staff can act upon without larger interventions such as budget or engineering kind of information. So before us tonight is the first draft at refinement of this, which as the memo indicates, seeks to clarify the types of requests that can be responded to in such a program. So the first primary element of this is that the proposed change seeks to clarify that signalized traffic controls and traffic calm devices will not be considered through this program, but may still be requested. And so if someone wants to apply for traffic signals or a speed hump or something of that, which requires more complex evaluation, installation, and budgetary needs. We would take that request in, respond to it as best as we can in the interim, and let them know that it'd be placed on discussion within the village's long-range plan, which takes place annually, I believe, every spring. Is that correct, Leanne? In the spring? Yep. So that
Yes.
so that's the first element of it. And that, as you might recall, is based on response to a recent request for a traffic calming device that we as staff acknowledged was larger than this program was intended to respond to. I can keep going, or do you want to take questions within?
Trustee Lynn, do you have any questions at this point? I feel like the document's pretty straightforward and just
Yeah.
from being
That's just
through a lot of
the
discount.
whole thing if you don't need me to.
No,
but yeah.
no.
Yeah, you don't need to read the whole thing, but it's-
So yeah, the next part would just be to clarify some definitions and add key goals. Some of this has come up with residents who've disagreed with how the document was interpreted. And so in working with Director Butchlick, we've just kind of refined those to make them more consistent and in line with what we were seeking. It also seeks to add more parameters for marked crosswalks in conjunction with either the commercial district or the village's Safe Route to School program. It clarifies that parking regulations will be reviewed in conjunction with codified standards. And then no real changes to the procedure section have been suggested outside of identifying or clarifying qualifying requests. So we hope this will kind of cinch up the program and make it more responsive to both resident and staff expectations. And so be happy to take any questions if you have them.
I have no questions, but just recently I remember an email going through with a resident that was interested in daytime parking permit, and the resident reached out directly to the chief of police, and the chief of police just granted that request. Is that something that would fall in line with this?
So that falls under the, I'm gonna get the name wrong, but the residential, the daytime residential program in the Southeast, which actually gives the chief that authority already per code.
Okay.
So that's not changing a regulation. That is just administering it. And that's how that would be. The village board could obviously change that regulation, but it would need to take place outside of this program. This is more for smaller types of no parking in front of this kind of area or changing to regulation timeframes and things like that.
I think this, after reading through this, you did a really good job of both making it more concise and expanding where it maybe needed to be expanded on a couple of items. And I think the exclusion of these more physical like if we're pouring cement, that is excluded from if we're just changing what's written on a sign, and I think those are two very different tasks. So I think they should be separated away. I really didn't have any questions.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to add to that as well. I just wanted to say, I really appreciate the time and effort put into, updating and cleaning up a lot of our policies and codes. It's very much appreciated. And I know you spent a lot of time doing that. So Bart, really appreciate it. Thank you. With that, are you looking for a motion, or is it just
I believe
yep.
we will
I
for a
think a
recommendation to the board, correct?
I'm happy to make the motion here, which is I recommend the village board consider refinement of policy 43 traffic and parking regulation request program for approval as drafted.
Second?
So that motion carries.
All right. Thank you, Bart.
Thank you, Bart.
Next on our agenda is 2024 Downer Avenue Reconstruction GI Enhancements Review, the Southeast Area Combined Sewer Improvements Project Phase 2, project meeting number 9. Presenter tonight is Leanne Bushlick, Director of Public Works.
Thanks. I actually put together some worksheets that I think might help us in this this afternoon, so they're not in your packet. In order to memorialize them, I will include them with the committee notes when I complete those.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Leanne.
So the top page, I think, is what might be the best place to start. You'll recall that previously, the engineering consultant Strand, and there's a GI specialist sub-consultant, who is the Sigma Group, reviewed their analysis of the project and engineering options for green infrastructure enhancements. And they recommended 3 alternatives for the phase 2 portion of the combined sewer improvements. So the first part of this worksheet lists those recommended alternatives. And I'll note that they are listed on the worksheet in the order of greatest estimated total suspended solids removal. So by one definition, you could say the most effective options. And the first of those was a biofilter on the east end of the Menlo Boulevard. You will recall that the board approved the addition of a biofilter on the west end of the Menlo Boulevard at Maryland at the discussion that I referenced earlier. So this would be very similar, but the other end. If you were to choose to direct staff to move forward with a full recommendation then to the village board, that particular option does not require any other discussion or other types of considerations, other than I would like to note that there is obviously an ongoing maintenance consideration. The second alternative that was reviewed in the analysis was porous pavement in parking areas. Typically in this region, when we say porous pavers or porous pavement, we really mean interlocking pavers, similar to what we used in the Hubbard Park parking stall areas. Just a couple of considerations there. Those would be located only in parking lanes. Typically, those aren't designed for the loads of traffic that we would see in a traffic lane, particularly on an arterial street like Downer. So we would be talking about using those only in parking lanes. The ultimate, what we would call typical section that's designed would impact how feasible the use of that material would be. When we say typical section, that means what the road looks like from one curb to the other. What's the width of the driving lane? What's the width of the parking lane? Is there a bike lane? Are there bump outs? All of those things together are the road section. And when we say typical, generally what that means is the majority of the road looks like this. So if that typical section that the board chooses ultimately includes a shared bike and parking lane, staff would not recommend the use of pervious pavers. That is generally frowned upon for bicyclists, and it would make it very difficult design and construction to have part of that shared lane be pavers and part of it asphalt. So also important to note that because of the location of the village's main water transmission line on the west side of the roadway, we could not use the pervious pavers on the west side of the roadway. The other consideration for porous pavement in the form of pavers is that, practically speaking, they have pretty minimal annual maintenance requirements. They do need to be swept more frequently, but now that we actually have a sweeper completely at our disposal, that is really less of an issue than it used to be. So the third alternative that was identified in the report were bump out biofilters. The use of those types of devices. So just to clarify what I mean by that is it would be a bump out similar to what you approve for Oakland, what you see now on Oakland, what you see on Capitol, but it would be designed a bit more linear so that the area that protruded into the parking lane could actually be used for stormwater capture. And then the pedestrian pathway or the extension of the ramp and crosswalk would obviously be a traditional concrete sidewalk. But on either side of that, the buffer part of the bump out, right, could be plantings. I would presume that those would be extended. There's a picture or an example in your memo of what those might, what they might look like.
Yeah.
So just a couple of things to consider for those items is those aren't, it doesn't really matter what typical section, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, that you would choose. Those would be designed to work within whatever pavement section you ultimately approve. They are the most costly of the alternatives, both for construction and maintenance. There are ongoing annual maintenance considerations. They do provide pedestrian safety enhancements. And as we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that was recommended in the most recent bike and ped plan. And one other thing to consider is that bus stop locations will impact where and how we would design and site those. As you know, from the Oakland discussions, we typically would not put a bump out at the location of a bus stop.
Right.
Okay. So if you, at the back of your notes, I attempted to illustrate a couple examples of typical sections. So the top, and please note, this is Leanne messing around. These are not to scale. This was not drawn with CAD or any type of engineering software. But the first alternative shows what Downer Avenue's typical section is currently. You'll see that there are two, and I should note that these aren't marked, but presumed. So there are presumed two 12-foot travel lanes and two 10-foot parking lanes. We have a total width currently of 44 feet. A proposed typical section for the reconstruction would alter that. One option would be to alter that to two 11-foot travel lanes and two 11-foot shared bike and parking lanes. So that in a shared lane, that would be marked with a single solid white line. If you are able to recall, this would be a configuration very similar to, well, Lake Drive in its current state, and also Wilson Drive before it was reconstructed. In fact, 44 feet curb to curb that's the exact width of Lake Drive currently. Another option that you may consider, right below that, this shows what the typical section would look like at locations where bump outs would be installed if you chose to go that route. So that bump out would actually take up the entire parking lane to allow the pedestrian to get as close as possible, shorten that crossing distance as much as possible. So what you would see in the typical section would be bump out, bike lane, travel lane, bike lane, bump out.
Does parking, retains parking not shown, is that just around the bump outs? Is
Right,
that past the bump
because
out?
there's no parking in the
Bump out.
bump out area, but
Yeah.
in the portion of this that where bump outs would not, so mid-block, it would look
Right.
exactly like the
Yeah.
illustration immediately above.
Just the crosswalk.
Right. So an alternate typical section, which is shown at the bottom of the page, would be two 10-foot travel lanes, two 5-foot okay, let me try that again. Two 5-foot marked bike lanes and two 7-foot parking lanes. Now, admittedly, those are all very tight. A bus or a very large truck traveling in a 10-foot traffic lane its mirrors would overhang into the bike lane. On a roadway like Lake Drive, that is something we probably wouldn't be interested in considering because of the traffic volumes there. Downer does not have a significant amount of truck traffic. I think typically speaking, the biggest trucks we see there are our own, and then the bus.
Bus is pretty regular though.
It is
Because
pretty regular,
I think there's two lines that come
Right.
out of UWM down
right?
that street.
But given the traffic counts on Downer, the likelihood that you are going to have two buses passing,
Sure,
two
sure.
cyclists and two parked cars, at exactly the same point along the roadway is pretty slim.
It's unlikely, but it would happen to me though,
Well, it
specifically when I, if it's gonna happen to anyone.
So, this isn't necessarily the section that I would recommend. But it is an alternative for you to consider. And I think really what would drive that would be if there was a strong desire for a marked separate bike lane. A bike lane that is clearly delineated separately from the traffic or the parking lane. Just for reference, the second page includes the current typical sections on Wilson Drive. Just thought that might be, of some interest because it's a similar traffic volumes are similar arterial and recently reconstructed. So that does have obviously mic'd. I did it again. My contraction of the day. Marked bike lanes at 5 feet, and then the parking lanes on Wilson vary between 7 and 8 feet, depending upon where you are on the roadway. If you're in the area or the section with the median boulevard, then the parking lane on the west sides are 7. On the east side, they're always 8. So that's just some reference. We do have 7-foot parking lanes in the village. It's not our standard, but we have some. So if we just summarize that on your notes sheet, current typical section, 2 travel lanes, 2 unmarked parking lanes, 44 feet curb to curb. Typical section alternative 1, which is what I would recommend at this point, would be 2 11-foot travel lanes and a shared 11-foot parking and bike lane on either side of the roadway. A second alternative for a typical section would be 2 10-foot travel lanes, 2 5-foot marked bicycle lanes, and 2 7-foot marked parking lanes. Just a couple of things to consider as we talk about typical sections. The bike and ped master plan did specifically suggest that the village evaluate possible bicycle accommodations on Downer Avenue, south of Capitol Drive. I think it's important to note that that plan says bicycle accommodations, does not say bicycle lanes.
Mhm.
And so the recommended alternative would be considered a bicycle accommodation. The second consideration there and would be just to note that not specific to Downer, but the plan does make a number of recommendations related to bump outs. Just basically stating that they should be evaluated in all of our infrastructure projects, and that you can utilize that additional space created by the curb extension with green space to maximize the positive effects of that space. And that's really what we're talking about tonight under that alternative, is to use that for GI. And then with the added benefit of it being a pedestrian safety enhancement. So it's a lot of information, right?
Thank you.
I
Yes.
will say that it was not necessarily my vision that you made a final decision or recommendation tonight, but my hope was to sort of lay all of this out and then kind of walk you through a decision matrix, which is the second notes page. And that would be, just listing all of the alternatives and asking ourselves, is it impacted by a typical section consideration? And so of those, only the porous pavement is. If it's not, is it of interest to you? Do you want to talk about it some more? If you do, is there more information that you need? We can try to put that together for you. And if there is interest, do you need additional review or additional input from another body, source, or group?
Thank you so much. It's
Yeah.
just really appreciate this conversation about green infrastructure, and these are all fantastic options here. And I think I'd be interested to hear, Trustee Lynn, what you're thinking.
Yeah, I got a lot of things brewing.
Yeah.
So a couple points of clarification, I guess. So with regards to bump out biofilters, there are still some sections that may have regular bump outs. Correct, even if they're not necessarily biofilter bump outs, or is that
That's really up to you.
could be determined? Okay.
That's up to you.
And if we're including a bump out, or a couple of bump outs here or there, you know, that I'm assuming that's the majority of the cost, then to make them a, you know, biofiltration bump out as well is probably less additional cost, or the cost is
No.
for the bump out itself, or
No,
is it more for
typically,
the?
The
Okay,
cost of the underground connections that you don't see
because of the
is the
price you
most
don't see.
expensive.
Okay,
So the original analysis included an illustration at the end that indicated the locations of possible curb extensions and bump outs.
Mhm.
We did do a cursory review of those to make sure that they worked with the existing underground infrastructure and did not conflict with bus stops.
sure.
So I still have some concerns about where they cited the downer or the Edgewood option, but
Okay,
for the most part, I would not recommend them at every intersection on Downer,
Mhm.
but probably really key intersections where we would typically see or believe that we would see, you know, a needed aided crossing.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's a much different street because of the lack of businesses on that street, you know, whereas Oakland, obviously you have so much foot traffic. Most of the foot traffic on Downer is going along Downer. Okay, and so then the other, the main biofiltration, the Menlo Boulevard biofiltration, that looks like it would be large,
It is quite a bit larger
Okay.
than the one on the west end.
but it's the most efficient because it's at the bottom of the hill, so we can
Yep.
just filter everything into it.
Correct. That's
So, yeah,
all- yeah, and that's also why it's listed as the most
the number one.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a very large drainage area
Yeah.
that would push water to that location.
Yeah, I mean, that, to me, that one spot, while it would take up a little of that boulevard, you know, it would still look nice, it's still nature, still a natural area, but it would probably keep a lot of basements dry in that area. You know, so to me, it looks like a good place for it.
Just to clarify, it would provide water quality benefits, minimal water quantity benefits. We've really addressed quantity with the gray or the underground infrastructure.
That takes care of
Um,
most of it, sure.
You know, I'm certain that everyone who lives in that area would be thrilled with every additional drop that we can pull out.
Right.
But I just want to be clear in the
Sure.
narrative.
The pipes do the most work. Okay, and then last point is with regards to the bike lanes. As much as I do love bike lanes, I'm not opposed in any way to shared bike and parking lanes, and I think that's partially because the state code on bikes is very clear. Bikes have the right to the road regardless of bike lane existence, any lines, anything like that. Bikes have full rights to the road. They can take traffic at any time that they want. They're in the right of way to do that according to state law. And bike lanes themselves, the painted lanes, it's really more for cars. It really helps to separate where cars park and drive more so than where bikers are allowed to go, because bikers are allowed to go everywhere. So I don't think you necessarily need a bike lane to sacrifice lane width and push cars into that bike space area. I think is worse than giving a little bit extra cushion in the general area that a biker can be. So I'd be leaning towards that proposed typical section as the best option. And that's all I got for now. So
Great, thank you. When we're looking at the porous pavers, I love talking about porous pavers. Someday we're going to see porous pavers in this village because they seem to be always the first ones that we're just like, this doesn't work here.
aren't they in the alleys though?
Oh, yeah.
We
do
have them in
porous
the
pavers
alleys
some of
and we have
yeah,
them in the
that's right.
Hubbard parking lot.
Yeah.
That's right. Sorry. So can we, will these porous, if we put the porous pavers in here, does that go to combined or is that going to go to the separate?
This is the combined area.
Okay.
And that is something that I probably should have kicked off with,
Yeah.
but it is noted in the memo
So,
that for all practical purposes, what we're talking about here, and should the board choose to add GI enhancements to this project, we're doing it really as a demonstration of the village's commitment to water quality and green infrastructure. Because we're in the combined area, all of the water that enters the storm drains or inlets is ultimately treated by MMSD. In the separated area, that is not the case. So you use green infrastructure to remove those stormwater pollutants before the water is discharged directly to the river. This water is treated, and the treatment process removes those pollutants.
yeah, so I love green infrastructure. I will vote for it all the time, but I will only vote for it when it makes sense. And to me, this is an expense that, I'd have to take a deep dive here. And I think the Menlo Boulevard biofiltration, I think that makes sense. The porous pavers, I do have a hard time with. They are an estimated cost of, we're looking at about $122,000, $24,000. Can't do math that quickly, but from Shorewood to Beverly, 66,000, Newton to Menlo, 66,000. And with that water just going to the combined sewer system, I think that, I think we could save that money, to be honest with you. And this whole area is combined sewer system. So
Correct.
all of this green infrastructure is essentially just go. Yeah.
That's one way of putting it.
So I guess I kind of have a hard time with all of it, to be honest with you, which is hard to say because I'd love to see this and I'd love to kind of show off our commitment here, but the price tag is kind of high for something like that. So with that in mind, Jerry, does that
Yeah. What was the cost on the big Menlo one again? I'm sorry. I
the
know
big one
it's-
is $360,000
Yeah.
for the Menlo Boulevard at Downer. I mean, are there other places we can divert these funds? They could be more effective.
Again, staff typically makes the recommendation that any GI funding that the village gets from the district be focused in the separated sewer area
Mhm.
for the very reason that we're talking about. One thing, again, to consider is that this is the largest infrastructure project in the village's recent history. And I would expect it's going to be the largest infrastructure project. Well, single infrastructure project. We'll forget about lead services for a little bit. For some time. And though I make the argument about focusing in the separated sewer area, I really think this is an opportunity that the board should consider related to demonstrating its commitment to stormwater management, GI, good practices for removal of TMDLs, total suspended solids, phosphorus. I think personally that it may be a missed educational opportunity if the village doesn't include some type of green infrastructure enhancement in this project. Again, largest infrastructure project in recent history. The village has, I think, been a leader in the metro area in the installations of green infrastructure and using it and applying it very thoughtfully and very carefully in some pretty tight areas. And we're not going to get a lot of opportunities to do another roadway for example, Lake Downer. We don't have many. And that's really the last large one left outside of Lake. And the village included pretty minimal green infrastructure on that project for the same reason.
Mhm.
This is a bit of a different atmosphere, we'll say, arena, just a very different feel, more of a neighborhood. I think there's opportunities here for education. Certainly an opportunity to demonstrate, our commitment to these types of practices. Am I advocating that you install everyone to the nth degree that is possible? I don't believe that would be the best use of our resources, but staff does recommend that the village consider some use of GI in the project.
What percentage from the budget is GI compared to the overall sort of big budget here?
Well, I have not done the math, but phase one, we are at an estimated $15 million. And the GI that you approved in phase one is a fraction of a percent.
A fraction of a percent. Okay. I thought I read like 7 million.
In GI?
Yeah. No.
No, you approved the installation of the one small
Oh, yeah, that's
biofiltration
right.
at the end
Yep,
of Menlo,
Yeah.
which I think was perhaps, I believe it was, well, I can look. But not a significant percentage of $15 million.
Phase one currently, green infrastructure costs will be incorporated into the total project. Construction of phase one is currently estimated 0.4 million, 0.2 million. I just got with, I think that was into those projects, but the total construction of phase one is currently at 9.4 million. Is that right?
Yes.
What it's looking like. And then phase two, we're looking at 7.2 million. And then we're going to basically annually, we get $120,000 from MMSD Green Solutions. Do you know of other grants? Are you thinking of other grants specifically that we could go after? It seems like that could be a good opportunity, or it might be hard to get those grants because these are going to the combined sewer system.
That may be a consideration. Identification and assistance with grant funding is part of the sub-consultants' work. There are, in addition to the annual allocation that the village receives from MMSD for green infrastructure, they also have a competitive program, which is the Green Infrastructure Partnership Program. You'll recall that we received a relatively small but competitive grant for Hubbard from that program. So certainly there is the possibility, that the village may secure some funding there. That's capped, and it's capped at a unit of money for every gallon of water treated or pound of sediment removed. So the size, the impact of that grant will be somewhat, if we were selected, would be dependent on the type of GI that we chose to install. The other, I guess, well-known grant program would be Fund for Lake Michigan. I'm not sure how, I don't know how they would look at it, knowing that it's actually in the combined sewer system. They may like that. They may think that may not be the best place to allocate resources, I'd say. And,
just for my knowledge, is there a benefit to cleaning the water that's going into the combined sewer system? Does MMSD look at our community and say, hey, you're really giving us a lot of, dirty water. There's, the filtration system's running really high. We're going to, I'm not sure how that process
I've never
works.
had that type of conversation
Okay.
with them. But MMSD has really, they really advocate the use of green infrastructure. And in their eyes, based on the communications that they've given the member communities, I don't think they necessarily differentiate where it occurs.
Sure.
It
So
doesn't
they
matter
wanna-
to them what type of system it's in. They have a goal, and actually, I think it's in their federal permit, that they have to have so much green infrastructure installed within their permit period. So that it doesn't, I don't know that they have a preference for system type.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I just want to look at this number real quick. We're still under, I mean, it looks like we're probably approaching about $500,000 for phase 2 GI. Is that,
I
If
think,
we do all of it.
if we do
Yeah.
all of it?
I mean, depending, right? We talked about reasons that porous pavement may not be the best
Right.
option for us. And then the bump out biofilters, I think that's where we would need to do a real hard dive into where, what's the best places to put these? How big would they be? Are there any other underground utilities or other structures that might impact their size? So they may vary from one location to the next based on other factors. But certainly that boulevard biofilter is the largest expense. And then
Is there a smaller version of that? Could we do a,
that's certainly a question that I can ask.
okay.
I think if we're going to do that, and I don't want to say we're going to do this for show. I hate to say that because I think there are some
There's still
definite
benefit.
benefits
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
this. And I
Yeah.
think, I think to go big for at least one element here, this would be, that would be I'd be leaning towards that. I'd love to kind of explore that a little bit more, but I'd also like to see maybe a pared down version of that too.
Yeah.
For me, the porous pavers, I think, I could see myself agreeing with all of these things here and moving forward with them, but I really want to be a little bit more thoughtful about the money that we're spending here. And, with porous pavers, maintenance, I know it's very little maintenance, but, people are parking there, the trucks are going through, plows are going through, and then, I mean, we could lose a couple here and there and you'd have to go back and replace them, and that's a real issue. So I'd rather stay away from potential items like that where we'd have to keep going back and doing maintenance to them, so that's where I think like, we could probably do without those particular ones. But I would be interested in the biofiltration bump outs. I would be interested in the biofiltration basin. And would love to explore those a little bit more. I'm not sure if I want to make, I think where I'm at is I'd love to just kind of explore those options a little bit more and not fully approve them tonight, but I just still interested in moving forward with something here.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'd like to see if they can give us a smaller version of the biofiltration basin. Just from the perspective of, I mean, I hate to keep going back to this, but it really is a lot of land they're taking up on that boulevard. And I know the people there use that land really as a park. The kids play there. That's a pretty big chunk that's getting.
That's half the boulevard.
Yeah.
So I think, maybe even talking to some of those residents in the community and getting some feedback over there would be a good idea.
And I would also add, I'm okay with the idea of doing biofiltration bump outs, but I don't know if we need as many as are potentially labeled here, just given the foot traffic of Downer. So we could probably save a little money if we did some, but not all.
Off the top of your head or looking at the map, do you have what you would consider at this point as a starting for,
I think
favorite areas or intersections?
Yeah, I mean, I think you really only need it kind of more at the start and the end. Low traffic coming into Shorewood and on either end.
I really do like the Menlo bump outs. I think those are a must. We should keep those for sure. I think that's kind of a showpiece right there.
That would fit with the design there.
You know,
Yeah.
I think people coming into Shorewood, that would really kind of stand out to people.
But I don't think Beverly
Yeah.
or what.
I mean, to be honest, I think we could keep it at keep it at Menlo and just those four at Menlo.
Yeah. Is there a reason there isn't one on Edgewood? Is it the bus?
So on the west side of Edgewood it's a bus stop.
Okay.
On the east side of Edgewood is our meter vault.
Oh, that's right.
So when
Okay.
the consultant originally showed them, they had them located north of both of those areas and that it would not be my recommendation, excuse me.
It'd be off the street. then,
That we
yeah.
install a mid-block crossing.
Yeah.
That goes against everything we try to, try to do and try to educate people about.
Yeah, the people crossing are crossing edge there, to UWM and whatnot. They're not in the middle of the street. Okay. So yeah, and I would just, my last point is I don't love the Porous pavement parking lanes, given that we're probably in the direction of shared biking and parking lanes. And it's not an ideal biking surface. So
Yeah, I would agree. I think we could probably just go ahead and remove the porous pavers of that.
Yeah.
I would also reconsider too the bump out in the middle of between Kensington or between Shorewood Boulevard and Capitol. Is there a reason behind bump outs up there? Just
that they fit probably.
Yeah.
okay. I don't think that's necessary.
Yeah.
I think, if we were to do two more, probably that intersection at Shorewood Boulevard, that could be a good spot, but I would probably stick with the 4 at Menlo and then the 2 at Shorewood Boulevard, and the rest I don't think are necessary.
I'm not entirely sure we even need the ones at Menlo.
Really? At Menlo?
I know it looks nice, but it's already such it's already such a distinct area with all the green space and the little roundabout there and everything else. Is it that much of a traffic calming measure at that point? I mean, how much more does it calm traffic than you're already it's kind of a slow area, but maybe I'm not thinking
You
about it
think so?
right,
I think
but-
it's pretty, I think there's a lot of traffic. I take that. I used to take that to my office every day and it can get pretty.
You think right there? Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm, of course, open to it. I just,
I think it makes a statement. I think that's kind of like we're talking about
Sure.
that element of this a little
Sure.
bit, and it
The
just
statement
it
element.
makes a big
Mhm,
statement to have that the biofiltration, the basin right there, and then the bump outs. I think if we're looking at making a statement and being effective, that would be the all-in move to make. Is everything there at Menlo?
so then here's another question. So if we have 4 bump outs there with biofiltration in each of the bump outs, do we need the major enormous biofiltration?
Well, maybe we
basin?
could cut that one in half. Like
we cut
maybe
that one in
cut
half,
that in half, and then you have the
add the
4
bump
down
out?
there. I think that could.
I would have to verify.
Yeah.
But I believe that the 4 smalls would
Wouldn't come
not
close.
nearly
Okay.
cumulatively equal
Okay.
even probably a substantial percent of the other.
Okay.
But we can certainly, I can get some harder numbers on that. Are you?
Doesn't need to be. I just.
And I'm just throwing this out there, from a cost perspective. It would be half the cost to have only one, either the north side or the south side have bump outs.
That's a great point.
I'd be okay with that.
I'd be on board with that as well.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I would be on.
Yeah.
Any recommendations?
I think that honestly something that I would ask the engineer to say, is there Does siting bump outs or curb extensions on the north side of that impact any of the anticipated drainage that was supposed to go
Mm-hmm.
to the Menlo? So, I can just see from an effectiveness standpoint, which of the two options they think
Yeah.
would work better.
Sure.
That'd be great. Your thoughts then, I know we're getting close here to time, but your thoughts then, trustee Lynn, about the Shorewood Boulevard bump outs?
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't know if you need them. I mean, maybe if we could hear from some residents in that area, if they think, oh, I hate crossing the street here, something like that. If I had some concrete residential concerns, I'd be certainly more open to them from the safety perspective. But
Yeah.
unless I hear that, I don't necessarily see it.
Yeah.
So
I know there are some kids that live on that block, but
Yeah.
I don't see a ton of traffic. I know kids walk to school every day from, just go to St. Roberts is right there. So
right.
usually when I'm coming home from work or, I see just kids riding their bike and walking up Downer to get to St. Roberts or home from St. Roberts. So I think
But
there's a
they're
lot of
usually
kids.
crossing it though.
They're crossing at the light.
Yeah, the light.
Yep, they're
So,
crossing at the light.
yeah.
So
The only thing that,
I was just
Sorry,
gonna say we're at
where are we on
7:31.
time? Okay.
just one point very
Mhm.
quickly. Downer is very wide. At that particular intersection, Shorewood is also incredibly wide. You do have a
Mhm.
very large expanse of
Okay. Yeah.
pavement.
Okay.
I think, I personally would love to see something in that, because I know just from always being on Downer that it is wide and, I do see families and kids, and I think to have that option there at Shorewood Boulevard would be a good one, but I would probably remove the one that's halfway out.
The half block, yeah.
Yeah, and
Let's-
the two and the two in between.
the
there over
alternating, yeah.
On Beverly, I think those can also go, but to keep one at least could keep those two on Shore Boulevard.
Sure, that
Okay,
makes sense. Yeah, motion to adjourn.
and then I do agree with the proposed typical section. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I agree with you, as I love to see independent bike lanes. I think that also makes a statement, but for this particular project, I think the shared bike lane makes a lot of sense. So,
Yeah. All right, motion
Cool.
to adjourn.
so moved.
Okay.
You got the
7:33.
direction you needed there,
Yes, thank you.
Director Bushlick?
Thank you
so
for
much.
putting
Really
this
appreciate it.
together. Yeah, sorry, we
is a soft white light. We had our board members take a look at it as we lit up one of the lampposts over on Capitol Drive, I think. No, the thought I think was just to find something to replace the snowflakes and something that also could be interesting and make a statement throughout Shore.
Thank you.
I have a question. So this will be, you're intending to do that this year and you'll repeat it annually, funds allowed. Okay.
Yep.
And I'm assuming there were no comments, that staff had any concerns about this? No? All right. I think it's a great solution. Trustee Ursing?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say congratulations. I've been a part of 3 different bid directors, all with the same challenge of getting rid of the snowflakes. And you were the one to do it. So thank you, Janet. Much appreciated. Looking forward to seeing our village lit up this holiday season.
We'll see. Just December 3rd, I'll let you know if that actually works. I'm not counting my chickens before they hatch, but the goal is to, I think, myself and Jake Brissett and Ned Brooks all walked around Shorewood for an afternoon and counted street lamps that could feasibly be used for the project. And we came up with, I think it was 190, 195 out of the 262. I know now know the number of street lamps in the village.
It's a good
But
trivia question.
I had emailed our criteria for which ones we selected, where 1, it had to have electricity with an outlet. 2, it could not have stoplights or flashing lights or any other kind of distracting light. And then 3, it couldn't have more than 1 posted sign. A lot of the street lamps have no parking signs or no U-turn signs or whatever, kind of sign needs to be posted, 2-hour parking. But so there's very, very few of those in Shorewood.
Well, that's great. So if there are no further questions, I would take a motion to approve.
I would love to do that, but I need to get to the page. Bear with me.
Page 61.
Page 61. Here we go. Here we go. Bear with me, folks. All right. So I move to approve the installation of winter street lamp light decorations as submitted.
Second.
Any further discussion? Any members of the public who would like to be heard? I'm assuming nobody's on the Zoom. We don't have any. Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. How many of there? 5 of us? 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on, the second order of business is an update from Dr. Deborah Blanks of Cairo Communications on the EDI Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Environmental Scan.
Thank you. You have a report from me in your packet, and I'm not going to review that. I'm just going to leave that for your review. What I thought I'd do with this update is just sort of lay the groundwork or the foundation for the final report and the presentation you'll receive in late December or early January. And so as we move to the next slide, I would suggest that the purpose of the diversity, equity, and inclusion environmental scan really is reflected in the RFP that the village manager sent out in March, I believe. And the idea is for the village to define through the environmental scan, the process for gathering information, for really assessing the progress that has been made with past and current EDI initiatives, and to set the framework for moving forward. So as we move to the next slide, I want to talk about the swamp. There's a swamp that you go through with EDI work. I know personally, when I was working on obtaining my doctorate degree, I obtained it in 2018. I was 67 years old, going back to school as an older adult, dealing with the newer technology, the new way of how the university works. And it took me 11 years working full-time and going to school part-time. I was in a swamp of not knowing where exactly I was going, how to get there. Sometimes it felt alone, anxious, ambiguous, but I succeeded. What I learned is you get through a swamp by going step by step, foot in front of foot, and finally you get to the shore. That's a similar feeling that people have when they're working with EDI in that environment. People feel anxious, they feel threatened, are concerned if they're going to be anxious or challenged. And so the easy way out is to go through the rose garden and avoid the issue, avoid the swamp. The quick way is to take a helicopter and just whiz over the issues. And what you find though is that people wanting to do that, wanting it to be easy, wanting it to be fast and quick, sometimes simply ignore the issues, or they identify other more pressing priorities that they want to focus on. But in the end, there's a cost benefit analysis and impact from dealing with EDI issues and ignoring them. So what Cairo is seeking to do is help the village of Shorewood through the swamp in a way that, yes, there will be some anxiousness. You will feel challenged. We will feel challenged. But we will work step by step going through it till we see the light and get on the other side of this. Where, if we do this right, and I'm confident we will, we'll see that the cost benefit analysis is a very positive reflection of the work that we've done, that you've done, and it will move the village in a very positive direction. The Cairo approach for diversity, equity, inclusion really has two main components. One is we really value the idea of a mixed method approach. That means looking at issues from a qualitative and quantitative perspective. That means that we do a series of things to test assumptions. I make assumptions, and often in interviews, I'll say, this is my assumption, tell me what you think, give me your perspective. But also we're looking at data, identifying specific findings, making recommendations based on the different perspectives that many people have informed us of. The other side is using an analysis framework that I've decided to term the CP framework, which means congruence, practice, people, and polarity. Next slide. The CP philosophy. Now, I'm a long-term athlete or would-be athlete. So for me, initially, CP3 meant Chris Paul. Sorry, I'm an avid Bucks fan. I really like Giannis. George Hill's my favorite. But CP is an all-star point guard, Phoenix Suns. Glad we beat them for the championship. But he is also known for being tenacious, being a leader, being focused, being resilient. And so for me, when I look at the CP philosophy regarding EDI, I'm really talking about those are some of the ingredients we'll need to be successful. But breaking down the CP philosophy, aside from Chris Paul, the Bucks, and the sports, is the idea of looking at congruency, looking at what are the patterns, what are the disparities. Does the data from interviews, from demographics and others jive, or are there disparities? And what does the information tell us? If there's conflicts in the data, what does that tell us? Looking at practices, assessing past and current DEI work to see where are the gaps, where are the opportunities, where were the successes, where were the challenges, but also understanding that the practices in government have historically been, have had some negative impact on people of color. If you look at the history, which I'll talk about a little bit later, I'll identify some of those negative impacts or unintended. I know that no matter how much you look at data, you also have to look at people. People decide on what direction to go, how to get there, how much cooperation to lend. And so for us, recognizing that people influence government functions, we also have to look at the level of agreement that people bring to the table. And then polarity. Oftentimes people look at disagreements as negatives, but there can be some value in looking at the different opinions, how they can blend it or mold it to be a cooperative venture. So I'm going to talk on the next slide a little bit more about congruency and how we assess that. When we use the mixed method approach, we look at a variety of, and this is one of the reasons I really enjoy the work, besides the issue itself of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I love looking at how things fit or don't fit together. So you take the history and you look at what then you look at the demographics. What does that say? Then you look at media information and interview. I have to say Sherwood today has really done a fantastic job in capturing a lot of the racial equity issues. The research interview, those are fascinating in themselves, but you compare that to the data, to the history, all of these things, and you bring all of these factors together and you look at the puzzle that you're developing, creating based on all of this information. And that really is what leads our research, not our personal opinions, not our biases, not our prejudice, but what the facts, the information, what other people are telling, what their data. And so when you look at that, you look at the congruency, but you also look at similarity. Moving to the next slide, when we look at practice, that second part of the CP3 framework, we're really looking at, as I mentioned, the fact that historically government policies have negatively impacted people of color. Sometimes that's been unintended consequences for planning, not really listening to the stakeholders, not hearing their voice. Sometimes it's been intentional. Some of the areas that have affected people of color, not just locally, but nationally, have been highway construction, housing, education, employment, urban renewal, and other policies and practices. For example, years ago, 1950, Black community was thriving in many ways, had its issues, but had a vibrant business district, had a culture that was criticized in a city report because Black people don't always visit each other in their homes. They are more likely to visit each other and congregate in social clubs and women's clubs and business organizations, civic areas, and so it was deemed a negative that Black folks didn't spend as much time visiting in their homes. It was also a negative because of the business district, where Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, many people of prominence came to visit as they went to perform in the white community. They came back to party and live in the Black community. The decision, though, was made to, one, implement urban renewal, where there was really no compensation and assistance to relocate. And the other decision was to construct Highway 43 in the heart of the Black community. Those two things helped destroy the Black community. People even now will talk about the good old days when Bronzeville was vibrant and the business community was active and supporting the community. The reason I mention those, especially with Highway 43, is that data shows that that decision was not the best decision. There were many other plans submitted that could have avoided the destruction of the community and could have been much better for the city. Whether the decision was made intentionally to hurt the Black community, I'm not going to debate that, but the point is that policies and practices of government have unintended and intended consequences that serve as a detriment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So while we don't anticipate finding anything that in our review, we are going to look at the history, at the policy practice, what those items tell. We also, of course, want to look at the DEI work, because you as a board and your government operations have really focused on this issue and have had many successes. We want to see where the gap. And then the last thing in that area regarding practice is we want to identify how to move forward in the most effective. When we look at assessing people are necessary to want buy-in, but often the idea is you want everybody to be on the same. My experience suggests to me that disagreement can be healthy. you want to allow space for difference of, briefly, I'll say I'll tell this very quick story about, many of you may have heard of the Abilene, the idea of a family coming together, the young lady, her husband and parents, to have a nice afternoon visit. And one of them decides, let's go to Abilene. No one wants to go, but they all agree. They had a terrible time. The travel was difficult. The food was lousy. The service was lousy. And once they get back home, they disagree and bicker because they all went thinking they had to agree when they really should have said no. We don't want people to go to Abilene as we're trying to move EDI forward. So what does that mean? That means we want to encourage disagreement. We don't want to force people to feel uncomfortable and feel like they have to be viewed as trying to move this initiative. So we want healthier. At the end of the day, we want to do things so people buy in, but that's not. And so the inability to manage agreement is just as important, just as much as a problem as the inability to manage. And then the last part of this wonderful philosophy is the idea of, and let me just go back to people before I move forward. The last part of that is really an internal work group. And we've initiated an internal work group. We've identified 4 staff, the village manager. And we have been working for executive and executive team, department. And we want to start this internal work group so we can hear the voices of people who are in government, who understand others might act, and to help us identify, obtain buy-in. Moving to the last part of this CP3 framework, we talk about the use of a polarity model. This idea is really grounded in the fact that we don't want everyone to feel like they have to agree, but we also want to disagree. Oftentimes people think that it's a us against them. It's an either or decision, either or for excellence, for equity. If you're for equity, you must be. Polarity, which is something that Barry Johnson started at the national level, is this idea of having 2 opposite tendencies that can come together. And you don't use the us against them philosophy. You use the idea of let's take the best part of both of items. Fine. So for instance, there's often a tension between the choices of equity and excellence, equity and efficiency. And we'll say, well, we something with equity because we'll lower our standard, bring in qualify for the test scores. I would argue and will show how thinking through this from a polarity, we can both. So, and thank you for following as I keep going. I'm very impressed. But the next slide shows what a polarity is. Not a list. It's really look on action. That sometimes exists between department needs and organization needs. The department may say we're unique, we're focused, we have expertise in this area. We want to move forward with the department initiatives. The organization is saying, but we need you to be a part of a team. We need your expertise across departments. We need to work together from a common ground. And so there's a way through polarity to take the best of both of these, the department needs and organizational needs, to make the organization stronger. So I won't go through that in detail, but to say that's the kind of idea we want to promote. We want to eliminate the lower things, which department, as many of you know who work in any kind of organization, the tendency is for departments to be siloed, and that becomes ineffective. The tendency for the organization can be to promote organizational big picture issues without really gaining the support of different departments and their staff. And so we want to take that model and use it as we look at EDI issues. So in conclusion, our mixed method research approach, our CP3 framework for analyzing data and research, the positive involvement of leadership, staff, and residents, our commitment to staying on time and on budget will ensure we do not linger in the swamp, but make it to the shore, having laid a strong foundation for the strategic plan and for the village to achieve its DEI goals. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that analogy. That is really helpful. All right, I will open it up for any questions. Or reactions. I know it's a lot to digest, so I was actually like, you could share a response too. A pause. Yes, trustee
Would love to,
Sigersink.
yeah, we just would love to see, we don't have in our packet, but would love to look at some of the graphics that were a part of this slide, Joe. That's,
We'll be including it after tomorrow. We're going to be including and bundling it within the packet.
Okay.
And be happy to send that to as well.
yeah, it'd be great. Thank you so much for your work so far. Look forward to continuing this work with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the presentation and enjoyed the interview a couple weeks ago and hope that if other trustees haven't taken the time yet, they will soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I very much appreciate it. It's very thorough. I think you're doing a really good job from the limited interactions that I've had with you so far. And I'm reassured a lot by this presentation that we are making it through the swamp and that there's a process for that. So I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Would you like to say anything, trustee Kudo?
I literally would be repeating.
Okay,
Come on, it's all right.
reinforcement. It's good.
Yeah. Politicians, we all have to, I mean, no, I mean, I'm excited to see the results. Eventually have a conversation. Be interested to see how the conversations go with the rest of staff and residents. Dig in a little bit, some of the data.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Mhm. Any questions from the bid? Okay, thanks for staying.
Thank you.
Janet, I'm about to give you a shout out, so if you want to stay a few minutes, you can.
Come on.
All right. That concludes special order of business. Moving on to item 5, consent agenda items. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Yes.
Really like the appointment that the Parks and Public Spaces Committee is recommending. I think that's going to be a very valuable asset for that group.
All right, hearing no other discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0 to approve the consent agenda as presented. Item 7, public hearings, there are none. Item 8, citizens to be heard. Are there any citizens to be heard? Either there are none in person, are there any virtual?
I do not see any hands raised.
Thank you. Item 9, new business. We have no new business this evening. It's a couple changes that needed to be pushed to the future meeting. That brings us to item 10, reports of village officials. Village president, I'll go with A3 first since Janet is staying. Janet has done an amazing job coordinating a presentation that will be offered November 1st. It will be a partnership between the Village of Shorewood, the Shorewood Police Department, the Shorewood Bid, and Milwaukee County Housing Services to present some information and information for both business owners and community members, focusing on how to address concerns about the welfare of individuals in our community who may be in need. It is going to be offered November 1st at 9:30 a.m. It says PM in our, okay, via Zoom. It is going to be recorded and posted. So if you're not able to attend, it is a resource that will be given. We had a great meeting with these partners last week. It is not easy to schedule this many people from different entities. So I really, really appreciate doing that. And we also hope, and the county hopes, that this might be a model that other municipalities can use to have a more inclusive and supportive environment in their business districts. So thank you, Janet. All right. Working backwards on my reports, A2, meeting of chief elected officials regarding police study. This is of the North Shore. As you'll recall, the city of Glendale contracted a study from the Wisconsin Policy Forum about analyzing data related to a possible police, how it pertains to if there were to be a police consolidation of the North Shore communities. Mayor Kennedy has asked for the chief elected officials to meet to go over the findings. He has made it clear that he's interested in seeing if there is interest in putting a referendum on an upcoming ballot regarding police consolidation. I just want you all to know that I'm going to go to the meeting and I'm going to listen to what he has to say, what our peers have to say, and I will come back and report on that. I was surprised that he wanted to jump right in because we hadn't had any communication after the study. So again, I just want to reassure that I will never take any action without talking to the board first. But I'm interested to hear what the other electeds are feeling in response to the findings. An A1 update on the ICC.
Sorry, can I ask
Yes.
a question?
Yes.
What are your thoughts?
They're not surprising to me. And my position has always been that as chief elected, my job is to access information that can be useful at whether it's now or later. So that's how I am with the study. You know, it is something that should be discussed in terms of gathering that data as a baseline. But that's as far as I've gone. Yeah. Let's see. An update on the ICC meeting from October 10th, 2022. As you'll recall, I was keeping you updated on Wisconsin Act 26, which has to do with designating a primary public safety answering. Is that what PSAP? That's what that stands for? Dispatch.
Gonna be, bet you dollars to donuts, it's gonna be North Shore Dispatch.
Oh, well, that's anyway. After some, I'll just get to the point. There was a motion to not take action at this time and to create a subcommittee or work group that will evaluate all the different decision-making points in designating a PSAP for Milwaukee County, a primary PSAP, I should say, for Milwaukee County. There is a disagreement. The Milwaukee County, City of Milwaukee, and the Village of Bayside are all interested in being that primary designation. There's not agreement at this time. I'm going to say, as I think there was some progress, this group has a history of being incredibly ineffective at making decisions, at coming to agreement. There are some really entrenched kind of modes of communication. County Executive Crowley, Mayor Johnson, myself, President Montgomery of the Village of Brown Deer, all spoke very honestly about how these modes of communication and decision-making and lack of cooperation may be reflective of a previous ICC, but it is not reflective of the current table. That the new people at the table need to be included. They need to be heard from. And because my concern around them making a committee is it's going to be the same 4 people who have been at the backbone of lack of decision over the last 10 years. So there was more honest discussion than there had been before. So it makes me hopeful that we can coalesce around something more positive and productive, because I frame this as a source of shared state revenue. And if we don't find a way to cooperate between levels of government, we will not have access to these new forms of shared revenue that the state is going to create. They are not going to return our state aids to where they once were. They're going to create other ways, and it's all going to be collaborative through county and local government. So at least that's my prediction based on what they're saying at the league. So I just wanted to share that with you because I think that we need to be, the reality is the county is the administrative arm of government. And regardless of how chief electeds feel about Milwaukee County and how it's performed in the past, the reality is it's a new day, new leaders, and new opportunities. And so we are going to have to work to figure that out. And that's even going to be among our peers in the North Shore as well. So that's all I'm going to say at this point. I just want to have you in case I end up on the news someday. I just want you to know. So they're in the swamp. All right, that concludes my report. And I also am looking into going to the Race Forward conference. They have a one-day government that the county is going to, and it's a whole government. It's looking at whole government approaches to dealing with addressing race and advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion. And my feeling is that if we are going to be working in collaboration across government silos, that we need to start attending conferences together and things like that. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to work that out, and I'll come back and share that. Okay, village trustees, other reports? Trustee Ursing.
I'll make it really short. Just a very prideful moment today, watching the new automated leaf collectors travel the streets of Shorewood. It was fantastic. Not an easy job with the wind blowing and the leaves flying everywhere today, but I think its first go, it was pretty awesome. So really happy to see those things out there.
Was there a ribbon cutting or like cracking champagne?
Only in my head.
There should have been. All right, anyone else? All right, village manager.
Just wanted to update the board that several meetings ago, there was a discussion which the board had asked for me to ask any developer who was coming into the village to do multi-unit development to consider affordable housing. And Three Leaf Development has voiced their intention to file an application for affordable housing assistance by utilization of the TID extension funds. So I have not received any application, so I can't give you a glimmer of what's in it at this point. But when we do receive one, we will be processing it in accordance with Policy 40. You'll recall in 2021, the board took 2 actions relatively around the same point in time. One was to create Policy 40, which was the TID creation and TID assistance policy. And it kind of goes through the process of how applications are submitted and then the review process. with the CDA and the board. The second action that was taken was the extension of TID 1 for purposes of utilizing that extra year of increment for affordable housing. So when that comes in, I will be assured to let you know. But for right now, I don't have anything, but I wanted to let you know it's coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 11, future items of consideration. There are none. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by trustee Ursink, seconded by trustee Kudo. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned at 8:15 PM.